With the last episode of the Amazing Digital Circus being so perplexing, I wanted to bring up some observations and theories based on everything we've seen so far. Many popular theories seem to focus on the tangible rather than the abstract, no pun intended. I want to take a look at the series through the lens of analytical psychology, and also compare and contrast it to another series that heavily relies on these concepts, Neon Genesis Evangelion. I believe these two series, while vastly different in tone, share a common underlying groundwork rooted in depth psychology. I am more or less going to use similar concepts from Eva as a framework for what could be actually going on in the Digital Circus. Also, I am aware that the primary inspiration for Digital Circus is the 1967 novel I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, and there is a lot of content comparing the two out there already. Gooseworks, the creator of the Digital Circus, has stated that the End of Evangelion is her favorite movie of all time and has affected her deeply, so I believe that it was another point of inspiration for the Amazing Digital Circus. Neon Genesis Evangelion is known for exploring different aspects of humanity through religious symbolism, as well as Freudian and Jungian psychology. For relevance, I am going to focus on Jungian psychology when comparing it to the Amazing Digital Circus, as I believe this is where the connection between the two works can be made. Before I dive into the analysis, I'd like to go over the core concepts of Jungian psychology that can be applied to both series. Carl Jung, one of the founding fathers of modern psychology, developed many theories about the human mind and how symbolism can explain deep truths hidden within ourselves and the world around us. Jung expressed an interest in the individual's connection to society at large, or what he referred to as the collective unconscious, imagery and impulses that exist within everyone regardless of their culture. The collective unconscious is expressed through symbolism or archetypes, which are often seen and experienced through religion and spirituality. Jung also theorized that there were different parts of the self, or masks, that we wear. He created a model to give a visual representation of this idea. The persona is essentially the part of ourselves that we show to the outer world, while our shadow is what we hide, or are sometimes unaware of. The shadow is a part of the collective unconscious as mentioned earlier, as it can contain deep impulses and desires that unconsciously drive certain behaviors. For example, we could be unknowingly fearful of people who remind us of someone who hurt us in the past and avoid them, even if there is no other evidence that this individual is going to do anything to us. This can also be the other way around. The kind of people we are attracted to might represent something that we desire deep in our subconscious that we might not be aware of. Archetypes are also another important Jungian concept that describes symbols or themes that can be applied to a person or situation to represent a larger idea.
As time goes on, we just end up falling into our archetypes, become part of the machine.
Many of these theories and ideas taken from Jungian psychology can be found in Evangelion. The connection between Jung's theories and Evangelion have been well documented over the years, so I won't go into too much detail about that specifically. Rather, I will use those connections to relate them to the concepts, characters, and plot of the Amazing Digital Circus, since I strongly believe that these same ideas exist here in a similar capacity. Evangelion and the Digital Circus are both series that deeply explore the many different sides of their characters. Evangelion does this slowly over the course of the series, and in a more subtle way that gives room for the audience to piece things together on their own. Digital Circus is a bit more explicit in its character development, dedicating mostly every episode to one specific character. If we use Jung's model of the human psyche, also known as the map of the soul, we are able to place different aspects of the characters onto it. If we take a look at Asuka from Evangelion, we could argue that her persona can be described as confident, hot-headed, and even arrogant. But if we take a look at her shadow, we'll see that she is someone who seeks out validation from others and has low self-esteem, due to the trauma from her mother. Almost all of the characters in Digital Circus can be viewed using the model as well. Ragatha's persona is optimistic, cheerful, and caring, while, like Asuka, her shadow represents her possible low self-esteem and a deep desire for validation.
Yo, Jax, I, hate you, but I don't want you to hate me. Is that weird?
And from what we know about Ragatha based on what she said during the bar scene in episode 5, her shadow side could be a result of trauma inflicted on her by her mother. Gangle's character can be easily applied to the model, given that her gimmick is that she wears different masks. Episode 4 paints a picture of Gangle's life before entering the circus, which reveals that despite her timid nature, she has also been in positions of authority and seems to have a need for control. Gangle is interesting because most of her traits that could be deemed negative show in her persona, while her assertive traits exist within her shadow. Throughout the next few episodes, Gangle seems to express disappointment that her career as a comic artist never took off, and resigned herself to a quote-unquote normal career. I think this is why Gangle goes a little power crazy in the 4th episode, because it was a rare opportunity to seize control of not only her surroundings, but also how the other circus members would perceive her. Her shadow could be described as innovative and wanting to take charge, but due to life circumstances, she had to suppress that in order to survive. Jax is probably the most interesting and mysterious character out of the primary circus members. This is going to be my biggest hear me out in this video, but I would actually argue that he is very similar to Shinji. While Jax and Shinji's outward personalities are the complete opposite, they both have a lot of similarities when we consider their shadow personalities. Also, both of them push people away by different means, with Shinji consistently avoiding confrontation, while Jax is more aggressive in his approach. One could argue that Jax is more similar to Asuka on the surface, but Jax is a lot harsher to the people around him than I think Asuka was during Evangelion. If we use the model to look at Jax and Shinji's shadow sides, we would see that both strongly desire connection and suffer from severe loneliness. Both have suffered trauma that has made it hard for them to accept the fact that they both desire connection. While the extent of the trauma that Jax has been through is still yet to be revealed, we can still see the impact it's had on his recent actions and motivations. Jax misses his friends who have abstracted, so much so that he keeps photos of them together on his wall. Losing his friends in such a way was bad enough, even without knowing his backstory before he entered the circus, and we see that it made him fearful of connection that he so desperately craves. This is evident by his interactions with Pomni at the end of episode 6. It is also interesting how Jax is known for keeping keys to practically every door in the circus, because I do think episode 7 revealed the key to finally getting out of the circus using his character specifically. I think the most important scene from that entire episode was the sequence where Jax appears to be abstracting. Before getting into it, I want to explore the various definitions of the word abstract. There are multiple meanings that can be applied to this word. The word abstract is often used to describe art that conveys an idea as well, often portrayed without anything that can naturally occur in reality. I would argue that the verb form of the word abstract would apply most to the digital circus, meaning to separate from something else. Ultimately, when characters abstract, they are separating themselves from the circus. From what we've seen so far, abstraction is considered to be the worst thing that can happen to someone in the circus. But what if that's not true? What if it's actually the opposite, and possibly the only way out of the circus? Early on in episode 7, there's a scene where Jax is alone in his room, when a dark opening in the corner appears. Shortly after this, we see what appears to be Ribbit's hands reaching out and grabbing Jax, which then transports him to a psychedelic realm surrounded by images of himself, Ribbit, and Kaufmo, the character who abstracted in the first episode. Jax is floating through this bizarre space for a while, until he is interrupted by a knock at the door. His eyes upon first waking up resemble that of an abstracted character. One could argue that this sequence was just a dream, but I don't think this is the case, simply due to the fact that his eyes looked like that when he was coming to. When I first watched this scene, it left me with an extremely uncomfortable and unsettling feeling. I assumed that this was the beginning stage of abstraction, but Jax's calm and relaxed demeanor is what frightened me the most. What it reminded me of was the feeling I had when I first watched the third impact sequence from the End of Evangelion. When watching Evangelion for the first time, we are led to believe that the Evas exist to prevent the third impact by fighting off the angels. We soon realized throughout the series that the end goal was to actually start the third impact to initiate the Human Instrumentality Project, which would create a perfect utopian world where everyone's consciousness is merged into one, and the existence of AT fields or the barriers between people would disappear. This basically strips people of their individuality, which in turn takes away any pain or loneliness that they may feel. I am starting to get the feeling that abstraction in the digital circus might very well be similar to the concept of human instrumentality. However, abstracting in the digital circus might be a better fate than what we see in Evangelion, as this series has a more optimistic tone. Episode 7 introduces the concept of the macroverse, which seems to be the name Cain has given to the real world outside the circus. What if when characters abstract, they enter this collective macroverse, or reality? Let's also revisit the Jungian concept of the collective unconscious, which the Jax scene feels reminiscent of. As Jax seems to begin to abstract, we see him go through a place surrounded by his close friends who abstracted in the circus. It's interesting how Jax sees what he truly desires as he begins to abstract, which makes me think that part of the key to escaping the circus is to accept the shadow part of your soul, and essentially letting go of your ego. The trippy visuals also could imply that this is an allegory for ego death, which commonly happens to people who have used hallucinogenic drugs. The visuals themselves here could be hinting at that. Ego death can be described as the complete loss of personal identity. In Jungian terms, an ego death is a painful end to your current self, leading to inner transformation that involves integrating your conscious self with your unconscious self, i.e. the shadow. During this scene, Jax is also not wearing any clothes, stripping him further of any individuality. What if, in the case of the digital circus, the macroverse or real world represents the collective unconscious, and in order to reach it, you have to accept your whole self? I also want to circle back around to the idea that Jax and Shinji function similarly on an unconscious level. A popular fan theory in the Evangelion community is that Comme ça sur Todd, the song that plays during the third impact, is written from the perspective of Shinji. However, if we apply the lyrics to Jax's character, it is eerily similar. The lyrics express regret and sadness related to the protagonist's inability to reach out and connect with others, after having the realization that you can't live life completely alone. I do think the last 2 episodes of the show will show Jax having this realization, as well as learning to integrate his conscious self with his unconscious. One of the core themes of the Amazing Digital Circus is self-acceptance, and I think this concept will play a much larger role when it comes to the characters escaping the circus than we may realize. This is a lot to consider, but I do think abstracting is the only true exit from the digital circus. I think the answer to the many questions we have about the series will be answered using allegories and abstracts, again, no pun intended, rather than concrete explanations. On another note, I do think the reveal of Ribbit's hand reaching out to Jax could hint at her possibly trying to reach him from the macroverse and pull him out of the circus. I haven't seen many others bring this up online, so I wanted to share as this could be another explanation for the appearance of Ribbit during the Jax abstraction scene. Another thing to keep in mind is the scene from the first episode where they discover that Kaufmo has abstracted. What if the writing all over his wall is a warning to the other characters, that there really isn't a physical exit within the circus, and that abstraction is the only way out? To answer the question proposed in this video's title, I would have to say no. The Amazing Digital Circus is not a retelling of Evangelion. However, I would argue that the 2 series are held together by the same underlying concepts and themes that drive the overall narratives, which is why the 2 are comparable in the first place. We can think of the underlying framework of Digital Circus like the one for Evangelion, but without the more Freudian concepts related to the influence of one's mother and mother-like figures. Also, before concluding this video, I would like to acknowledge some of the religious references sprinkled throughout the digital circus. I think these are used similarly as in Eva, more for the cool factor rather than actual significance. But, due to the nature of religious symbols, they have meanings attached to them that are impossible to escape, so we are naturally inclined to read a deeper meaning into the overarching narrative because of their presence. These religious, specifically Christian themes, have also been analyzed by others in the fandom, but notable examples include Pomni being interpreted as a Christ-like figure or savior due to her position in the Last Supper reference at the end of episode 1. And of course, there is the reference to Cain and Abel, with Cain being the ringmaster of the circus and the mysterious Cain and Abel corporation shown throughout the series that is most likely behind the circus's existence. After episode 7 pretty much threw every fan theory out the window, I would say that it's reasonable to expect anything to happen from here on out. The creator of the show Gooseworks also seems to enjoy psychologically tormenting the audience as much as the characters. In good faith, I might add. So I wouldn't put it past her to take a psychological approach in the storytelling as well. I also think Goose has mastered the art of distraction when it comes to world building, so things that may be obvious foreshadowing might actually be distracting us from the truth of what's going on. I'm interested to see if my theory comes to fruition, but regardless, I do believe that analytical psychology is a core component of the narrative structure for the Digital Circus, as well as Neon Genesis Evangelion. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and please like and subscribe for more content like this in the future. See ya!